Looks like something scraped off a cafeteria tray. My sister-in-law spat, grimacing at the dinner table. Even my kids could do better. The room went silent. I took a sip of water and said quietly, I didn't cook tonight. She blinked, looked around the table. Nobody moved. My husband knew. My mother-in-law knew. Even the two family friends we had invited knew. Everyone was waiting to see if she would put it together herself. She didn't. So I said it plainly. Your daughters made this. All of it. They spent 3 hours in my kitchen this afternoon because they wanted to surprise you. Her youngest, 7 years old, had been beaming when she set the table. She asked me 4 times if the presentation looked nice, straightened every fork, folded the napkins into little triangles the way she had seen on a cooking video. The older one, 9, had handled the stove with me standing right beside her, stirring slowly, asking every few minutes if it smelled right. She had written a note on a napkin she was planning to slide under her mom's plate once everyone sat down. That napkin was still folded in my apron pocket. The silence stretched long enough that one of the family friends quietly set down her fork. My mother-in-law looked at the girls. My husband looked at his sister. Nobody filled the space with reassurance. Nobody softened it. The oldest got up first. No dramatics, no tears, just a quiet push of her chair and a walk toward the kitchen. The younger one stayed seated, but she had stopped looking at anyone. She was staring at her plate like she was trying to figure out what she had done wrong. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the insult, not the embarrassment. The fact that a 7-year-old was sitting at a dinner table trying to work out where she had failed. My sister-in-law opened her mouth, said something about not knowing, said she was just being honest, that she did not mean anything by it, that people were too sensitive. But honest to who exactly? Her daughter, who had stood on a step stool at my kitchen counter that afternoon, tongue between her teeth, concentrating so hard on getting the seasoning right that she barely spoke for 20 minutes. Her daughter, who had made me promise not to tell because she wanted it to be a real surprise. Her daughter, who is now in my kitchen, sitting on the floor against the cabinet, not crying, just quiet in the particular way kids go quiet when they are deciding whether love is reliable. I excused myself from the table. I found the oldest exactly where I expected. Floor, back against the lower cabinets, knees pulled up. She did not look embarrassed. She looked tired in a way 9-year-olds should not look tired. Like she had run this calculation before and already knew the answer and had made this dinner anyway, hoping this time the math would come out different. I sat down next to her, did not say anything right away. After a while, she said, we should have just ordered pizza. I told her the food was genuinely good, told her the broth was seasoned better than most adults manage on the first try, told her that what happened out there had nothing to do with the cooking and everything to do with someone not paying attention. She picked at the hem of her sleeve, then asked me if her mom had even noticed they were not at the table. I did not answer that. Some silences are the kindest thing you can offer a child. Her little sister appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, still holding her folded napkin note. She looked at both of us on the floor, decided that made sense, and came and sat down too. The 3 of us stayed there while the dinner finished in the other room. Eventually, the younger one unfolded her napkin and smoothed it flat against her knee. She had written in careful, uneven letters, I made this for you, Mommy. I love you. She looked at it for a moment. Then she refolded it and tucked it into her own pocket. Later that night, after everyone had gone, my husband found me finishing the dishes. He stood in the doorway and said, she had no idea, did she? It was not really a question. No, I said. She did not know they cooked it, but that was not the problem. He was quiet. Then he said, the problem was that she did not ask. That was it, exactly. 3 hours, 2 kids, a step stool, and a carefully folded note, and 4 questions about whether the presentation looked nice. And not one moment at that table where their mother turned to wonder where any of it had come from. My sister-in-law texted me that night, just said, I didn't know. No apology, no mention of the girls. I left it on read. The next afternoon, the younger one came over while her mother was out. She helped me make soup and asked me to teach her how to dice an onion properly, the way grown-ups do. When she left, she hugged me at the door and said, next time I'm not going to tell her, it is a surprise. I watched her walk back across the yard and thought about that napkin still folded in her pocket. But to understand how we got to that dinner table, you have to go back further. You have to understand the kind of woman my sister-in-law had always been, and the kind of family she had been allowed to become inside of. I met my husband at a work event about 8 years ago. He was easy to spot in a crowd, not because he was loud, but because he was the opposite of loud. He had that quality some people carry where they seem genuinely interested in whoever they are talking to, like there is no part of them performing attention. It is rarer than it sounds. I noticed it immediately, and I never really stopped noticing it. We dated for 2 years before he brought me home to meet his family. He had warned me, gently, that his sister was a particular kind of person. He chose that word carefully, particular. I would come to understand that it was both accurate and insufficient. His mother was warm in the way that people are warm when they have spent decades absorbing the moods of people around them and smoothing things over. She had that practiced calm, the kind you develop not from contentment, but from practice. She had been managing her daughter since that daughter was old enough to make demands, which by all accounts had been very early. The sister, Renee, was 4 years older than my husband. She had the kind of confidence that fills a room and then keeps filling it past the point where the room is comfortable. She was beautiful in a deliberate way, the kind of beautiful that requires maintenance and knows it. She spoke in a register that suggested she was always slightly surprised that other people existed. The first time I met her was at a birthday dinner for my mother-in-law. Renee arrived 40 minutes late without acknowledging it, kissed her mother on the cheek, glanced at me briefly, said, so you're the one, and then spent the rest of the evening talking about herself. Not rudely. She was smooth about it. Practiced. She had a way of turning any conversation back toward her own life with such ease that you almost did not notice it happening until you were 20 minutes deep into hearing about her yoga studio membership and realized you could not remember remember the last time anyone else had spoken. My husband squeezed my hand under the table twice that night. I squeezed back both times. It was a language we established early. She had 2 daughters by then, aged 1 and 3. Their father was a man named Derek, who struck me as someone who had been slowly worn down by years of being in Renee's orbit. He was pleasant in a distant way, like a person watching a movie they had already seen. The girls were beautiful, wide-eyed and watchful, the way young children are when they have learned early to read the temperature of a room. The older one, Lily, clung to Derek at that dinner. The younger one, B, slept in a carrier on his chest most of the evening. Renee did not hold either of them once during the 4 hours we were at that restaurant. At the time, I told myself that was probably just because she was excited to be out, that it meant nothing, that I was reading too much into it. I was not reading too much into it. Over the first year of my relationship with my husband, I watched the shape of his family with the particular attention you give to things that matter. I paid attention because he mattered, and they were part of what he carried. What I saw was a mother who had spent so long accommodating Renee that she had reorganized her entire emotional life around it. What I saw was a brother who loved his sister and had mostly given up trying to reach her and settled for managing the fallout. What I saw were 2 small girls who were learning, at an age when children should only be learning how to play, that their mother's attention was a limited and conditional resource. My mother-in-law lived in the house she had shared with her late husband, a solid 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of house that feels slightly too large once the children who filled it are grown and gone. She kept it spotless. She grew tomatoes in the back garden. She watched British baking competitions on weekend afternoons and called her son every few days to ask about nothing in particular, which was really just her way of checking that he was okay. When my husband and I got married and started looking for a house, there happened to be a property for sale 2 doors down from her. My husband suggested it half-jokingly at first. I said yes without much deliberation, because I had spent enough time with her by then to understand that she was the kind of person you want nearby. She was steady. She was kind without being soft. She always meant what she said. We moved in on a Saturday in early spring. She brought us a casserole before we had finished unpacking, set it on the counter, looked around at the boxes and the half-assembled furniture, and said, "This is going to be a good house." Not, "This is a nice house, this is going to be a good house." Like she could already see it becoming what it would become. I loved her for that. The proximity worked well for the first year. We had dinner with her on Sundays most weeks. She came over to help me plant herbs in the small garden bed along the fence. My husband did her yard work on Saturday mornings, and she pretended to be annoyed by it, telling him she was perfectly capable while also clearly being grateful. It was an easy rhythm, the kind that builds quietly and holds a lot of weight. Renee lived about 40 minutes away at the time, in a house that she and Derek owned jointly. She visited her mother every few weeks, usually on weekends, usually with the girls in tow, and usually in a way that felt like a weather event. She arrived with noise and needs, and the implicit expectation that her presence was a gift being distributed, and she left the way weather leaves, with the room feeling slightly rearranged and everyone else quietly restoring order. I kept a careful distance from her in those early years, not a hostile distance, just the kind of considered space you maintain around something that could hurt you if you got too close. I was friendly at family dinners. I remembered the girls' birthdays. I answered her texts when she sent them, which was always when she needed something. The dynamic shifted when Derek left. He did not leave dramatically. He simply reached a point of diminishing returns and made a practical decision, the way a sensible person eventually stops pouring water into a cup with a hole in the bottom. He told Renee on a Tuesday evening that he could not continue, that he was not happy, and that he wanted to separate. He offered to stay in the house until arrangements were made for the girls. She told him to get out immediately, and he did, taking one bag and leaving everything else, which told me everything I needed to know about how tired he actually was. Renee called her mother first, then she called her brother. She did not mention the girls in either call, according to my husband, not in the sense of worrying about them or asking what the separation would mean for them. She mentioned them only in the context of what Derek's departure would require of her logistically, as though they were appointments that now needed rescheduling. The girls were 6 and 4 at the time. The first few weeks after Derek left, my mother-in-law drove to Renee's house nearly every day to help with the children. My husband went on weekends. I went when I could, bringing food, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories. Lily was old enough to understand that something significant had changed in her household. She had gone quiet in the way that perceptive children go quiet, absorbing more than she let on. Bee still reached for her father in unguarded moments, calling for him at the bottom of the stairs before remembering. I told myself this was temporary, that Renee would find her footing, stabilize, begin to carry more of the weight herself. I told myself that she was overwhelmed, and that overwhelmed people sometimes need more support than usual for a defined period of time, and then the period ends and things normalize. I kept telling myself that for about 2 years, which was approximately how long it took me to understand that for Renee, the overwhelmed period was not a phase. It was the default setting she had chosen, because overwhelmed people have their needs met by others, and Renee had always known that instinctively. In those 2 years, the geography shifted further. Derek eventually moved to a city 3 hours away for work. He had the girls on alternating weekends, which meant Renee had them the majority of the time, which meant that the majority of the time, the nearest available adults were my mother-in-law and us. I would not say that I became a second mother to Lily and Bee. I want to be precise about this because the framing matters. I did not attempt to fill a parental role. I did not try to replace or compete with Renee. What I did was simpler and, I think, more basic than that. When they were at my house or in my presence, I paid attention to them. I answered their questions. I showed up consistently. Those are not extraordinary ordinary things. They should not have stood out, but they did, because the contrast was so steady and so visible that the bar had effectively been lowered to the ground. Lily started coming to my house after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, because those were the days Renee had a standing appointment that she was vague about and that I eventually stopped asking about. She would sit at my kitchen table and do homework while I worked nearby. She liked to talk while she worked, not always about anything meaningful, just the running commentary of a school-aged child processing her day out loud. I learned a great deal about her teachers, her classmates, a girl named Sophie who had apparently committed some kind of ongoing social offense that Lily reported on with detailed and persistent frustration. Bea was quieter than her sister, and in some ways more watchful. She liked to help. If I was cooking, she wanted to be involved. If I was folding laundry, she stood beside me and folded her own small version of whatever I was folding. She had an earnestness about her that was both endearing and slightly heartbreaking, the quality of a child who has learned that helpfulness is the most reliable currency for affection. I noticed this about her early, and I thought about it more than I probably should have. The way she would look up after completing a task, waiting. The way she monitored expressions, checking to see if what she had done had landed well. The way she seemed to hold her breath slightly in the moments between doing something and finding out if it was right. That is not a natural state for a 6-year-old. That is a learned behavior, and you only learn it in one place. Renee, for her part, was not absent in any absolute sense. She was technically present in her children's lives. She took them to appointments. She attended school events, at least most of them. She fed them and clothed them and managed the logistics of their existence with reasonable competence when she was engaged. The problem was never that she was entirely gone. The problem was the texture of her presence when she was there, the distraction, the way her attention seemed to skim the surface of them without ever landing, the way she could be in the same room as her daughters and make them feel completely unseen. There were moments, scattered and inconsistent, where a different version of Renee appeared, where she would laugh with the girls at something on television, or braid Lily's hair carefully, or lie on the floor with Bea building something out of wooden blocks with genuine absorption. Those moments existed. I am not pretending they did not, but they were unpredictable in a way that was almost worse than absence, because unpredictable warmth trains children to chase it. They become small experts in what conditions generate the good version of a parent, always adjusting themselves, always hoping that this time the calculation will come out right. My husband saw all of it. He had grown up with Renee, and he understood the pattern at a cellular level. He had his own history with it, his own version of performing the right behaviors to access a version of his sister that was tolerable and occasionally even good. He had developed over decades a very fine-tuned ability to manage her moods without engaging them, to redirect conversations before they curdled, to absorb friction without reacting to it. He did this mostly without thinking. It was as automatic as breathing. What he found harder to do was watch her do it to her children. He could handle Renee's behavior directed at himself. He had the scar tissue for that. What he did not have was any comfortable way to watch Lily hold her breath in that particular manner while waiting to see if her mother was pleased, or to watch Bea fold a piece of laundry and look up with that expression. He would come to bed on nights after family dinners and lie on his back looking at the ceiling for a long time before sleeping. I did not always ask what he was thinking. Sometimes I knew. The Sunday dinner where Renee insulted the food had been planned 2 weeks in advance. My mother-in-law's birthday was approaching, and we had decided to mark it with a proper dinner at my house. I was going to cook. I had a menu planned. My mother-in-law had specific preferences, certain dishes that felt like celebration to her, and I knew them well enough by then to build a meal around them. The girls had been at my house the Saturday before, which had become a regular occurrence since Renee had started a weekend routine that she was also vague about. They arrived in the morning with their backpacks and spent the day in the comfortable, drifting way children spend days when they feel at ease somewhere. Lily read on the couch for a while, then helped me rearrange the pantry because she found sorting things satisfying, which was a trait I recognized because I shared it. Bea followed me into the kitchen around noon and stood beside me while I prepped ingredients for the week. It was Bea who said it first. She was standing on her step stool, chin level with the counter, watching me slice carrots with the focused attention she brought to everything in the kitchen. Then she said, "Can I make something for Grandma's birthday dinner?" I asked her what she had in mind. She was quiet for a moment, thinking seriously. She said she wanted to make soup because Grandma always said soup made her feel taken care of. That was a 7-year-old sentence. Soup made her feel taken care of. I set down my knife and looked at her, and I thought, this child notices everything. I told her that was a wonderful idea. I asked if she wanted Lily to help. She said yes immediately, with the particular emphasis of a younger sibling who wants the reinforcement of the older one's involvement, the validation of being taken seriously enough to have a collaborator. We pulled Lily off the couch and told her the plan. Lily's expression went through several phases in quick succession. Skeptical, then interested, then genuinely engaged. She pulled up a stool beside her sister, and they stood together at the counter like a small assembly line. I told them we were making a vegetable broth-based soup because it was the kind their grandmother loved, and because it was something they could genuinely do most of with supervision, rather than with me doing it for them. That distinction mattered to me. I did not want to do it for them and call it theirs. I wanted them to actually make it. Bea was in charge of washing vegetables. She took this seriously, washing each one twice and examining it closely before setting it on the drying towel. Lily was in charge of peeling, and I taught her how to hold the peeler correctly, showing her the angle so it moved smoothly. She practiced on 3 carrots before she felt satisfied with her technique. The chopping we did together, my hands over theirs, both for safety and for the particular quality of attention it requires. Bea's tongue appeared between her teeth the moment she picked up the knife. She held it in a white-knuckled grip and looked up at me very seriously and said, "Am I doing it right?" I adjusted her fingers, told her she was doing it exactly right. The broth building took the longest. That part required patience, which B had in abundance when it came to cooking, but which tested Lily, who wanted to see results faster. I taught them about how heat works slowly, how flavors need time to find each other, how some things cannot be rushed without losing what makes them good. Lily leaned on the counter and stirred with the long wooden spoon and said, "That's kind of like how some friendships take a long time." I told her she was right, that it was exactly like that. About halfway through, B grew quiet in a way that I had learned to read. Not upset, just internal. She was turning something over. I did not push. After a few minutes, she looked up from the pot and said, "Do you think Mom will like it?" I said I thought her mother would love it. B turned back to the pot, stirred it twice, then said, "She's always tired after her weekends. She might not be in a good mood." I looked at the 7-year-old standing on a step stool, carefully monitoring a soup pot and calculating in advance her mother's emotional state and adjusting her expectations accordingly. She said it with the flat matter-of-factness of a child reporting a simple, observable fact, like saying it usually rains on Tuesdays. No drama in it, no resentment, just a kind of preparedness that had been worn smooth by repetition. I said, "Whatever mood she's in, she will know that you made this because you love her, and that will matter." B nodded slowly like she was filing that away. Then she asked me to taste the broth and tell her if it needed anything. It needed a little more salt and a pinch of thyme. She added them both herself, measuring the time between her fingers the way I had shown her, releasing it slowly into the pot. She tasted it after. Her face went still for a moment in the way a person's face goes still when something is right. Then she smiled, private and satisfied, like a scientist confirming a hypothesis. That was when Lily, who had gone to find something to write with, came back to the kitchen holding a paper napkin and a marker. She sat down at the kitchen table and began writing carefully. I did not ask. She was clearly in the middle of something, and interrupting felt wrong. She brought the finished napkin to me when she was done. She had written in her tidy, careful handwriting, "I made this for you, Mommy. I love you." She asked if the spelling was right. It was. She folded it into a neat rectangle, asked me to keep it safe, and said she was going to put it under her mother's plate at dinner tomorrow. I put it in my apron pocket. That was Saturday. Sunday arrived the way autumn Sundays arrive. A little gray, a little still. The kind of afternoon that makes a warm house feel deliberately warm. My mother-in-law came over early and sat in the kitchen with me while the soup reheated on the stove. She could smell it from the front door. She stood in the kitchen doorway and breathed in and said, "Who made this?" I told her to wait and see. The girls arrived with Renee at 4:30. B came in first, immediately moving to the kitchen, lifting the lid on the soup pot, replacing it quickly like she was checking on a secret. Lily came behind her, caught my eye, and I patted my apron pocket. She pressed her lips together, holding in whatever she was feeling, and gave me a single nod. Renee arrived last, dropping her bag on the front hall bench, exchanging hellos with the family friends who had already arrived, reaching for a glass of wine from the sideboard in the way a person reaches for something they have been anticipating for some time. She did not go to the kitchen. She did not ask how she could help. She settled into the living room conversation with the ease of someone who has always understood that rooms arrange themselves around her. I watched from the kitchen. I was not judging exactly. I was just observing, the way you observe weather. She was what she was. She had always been what she was. Tonight was not going to change that, and I had not planned the dinner around changing her. I had planned the dinner around my mother-in-law's birthday and the happiness of two girls who had stirred a pot for 3 hours because they wanted to make something that felt like love. The table was set beautifully. B had come back to the kitchen 3 times to adjust the napkin folds. She had asked me twice if the ladle was on the correct side. Lily had placed the folded napkin note under Renee's plate herself, carefully, sliding it under so just the edge peeked out. We sat down. My mother-in-law was at the head of the table. My husband poured wine. The family friends, a couple we had known for years who understood the shape of this family without needing it explained, settled comfortably into their chairs. Renee sat across from her daughters. The girls sat quietly, B with her hands folded on the table, Lily watching her mother with the carefully neutral expression of someone waiting. I brought the soup to the table in the large ceramic pot my mother-in-law had given me as a housewarming gift, set it in the center. The steam rose slowly. Renee had been mid-sentence in a story about something at her gym. She paused only slightly as the pot was set down, glancing at it, waited for someone to serve her. I ladled soup into each bowl, working around the table. When I reached Renee, she was already continuing her story, holding her wine glass, gesturing. She took a spoonful without looking at it. Her expression curdled slightly. She set her spoon down, took another taste, slowly this time, with the deliberate performance of someone building toward a verdict. And then she said it. Looks like something scraped off a cafeteria tray. Even my kids could do better. She set it to the table, to no one specifically. In the breezy way she said everything she had already decided was true. Then she reached for her wine. Her daughters were 4 feet away from her. I took a sip of water. Let the moment gather itself. Let the silence find its own shape. Then I said quietly, "I didn't cook tonight. The story from there you already know. What you don't know, or what I have not yet said clearly, is what happened inside me in the hours and days that followed. Not the anger, because there was not much of that. Anger would have been simpler. What settled into me was something else, closer to grief. The particular grief of watching something you cannot fix. After the kitchen floor, after the guests went home, after the girls were settled and the dishes were done, I sat in the quiet of my living room for a long time. My husband had come to find me around 10 o'clock. He sat beside me and did not ask me to explain what I was feeling because he already knew most of it. He took my hand and held it, and we sat there in the dark, listening to the house settle. After a while, he said, "I keep thinking about the napkin." I said, "I know." We did not say anything else for a long time. There was nothing constructive to add. The napkin was its own complete thing. A 7-year-old's handwriting, 6 words. The gap between what was offered and what was received. There is no sentence you can build around that gap that makes it smaller. I kept the napkin. I know that might sound strange. Lily had given it to me to hold, and I held it. After everything that happened at the table, I took it out of my apron pocket when I was alone in the kitchen later, and I smoothed it flat, and I read it again, and then I folded it carefully and put it in the small ceramic dish on my windowsill, where I keep things I want to remember. I have it still. The week after the dinner was quiet in the way that follows a storm that has passed underground instead of overhead. On the surface, everything looked normal. Renee did not reach out beyond that single text. My mother-in-law came over for her usual Tuesday afternoon visit, and we made tea and did not talk directly about the dinner, but we both knew we were thinking about it. She asked after the girls without specifying what she meant by that, and I said they were doing okay, and she nodded in the way she nodded when she was accepting an incomplete answer because a complete answer would cost too much to give. The girls came on Wednesday. Lily did her homework at the kitchen table and did not talk much, which was unusual. She was processing something and doing it privately, which I respected. I let her work and did not fill the silence. B helped me make bread. She punched the dough with both hands when it was time to knead, and I could tell from the way she did it that she had some feelings to discharge. She was quiet at first, focused. Then, somewhere in the middle of the second kneading, she said, "Mom says she didn't mean it." I did not ask how she knew that, or when Renee had said it, or what exactly Renee had said it about. I just let the sentence sit. B punched the dough twice more, then said, "She says things, and then says she didn't mean them. But she already said them, so it doesn't matter, does it?" I was standing close enough that I could have reached over and put my arm around her. I considered it. Instead, I kept my hands in the dough and said, "What matters is how it made you feel." She thought about this with total seriousness, then said, "It made me feel like we shouldn't have bothered." That sentence did something to my chest that took a while to recover from. I kept my voice steady. I told her she should always bother. That making something for someone you love is never a waste, even when it does not land the way you hoped. That the making itself is worth something. She looked at me with that measuring look she had, deciding whether to believe me or whether this was the kind of thing adults say because it sounds better than the truth. Then she nodded once, went back to the dough. Lily, from the kitchen table, had been listening. She did not look up from her homework, but she said quietly, "The soup was really good though." B smiled at the bread dough. Just for a moment, just a small thing, that was enough. The shift in the months that followed was gradual enough that you could miss it if you were not paying close attention. The girls started spending more time at our house, not because Renee asked me to take them, but because they chose to come. They would knock on the back door on weekend mornings, backpacks over their shoulders, sometimes without a particular reason, just wanting to be somewhere that felt calm. I made room, always made room. Lily started asking me things she had not asked before, questions about her own abilities, not the kind of questions children ask when they are seeking permission, but the kind that suggest they are building a private map. She asked me once if I thought she was good at writing. I said I thought she was extremely good at writing, that her sentences already had the rhythm that most adults never develop, and I meant every word of it. She received this information with the slightly formal gratitude of a person logging something important. Dee became my consistent kitchen companion. Every time she came over, she found her way to the stove within 20 minutes. She was developing real instincts. She could taste a sauce and tell me without prompting that it needed acid. She knew when to turn the heat down without being told. She had that gift that cannot be taught, the ability to be genuinely present with whatever she was making, to give it her full attention. I started writing things down, her techniques, the questions she asked, the small discoveries she made. I was keeping a record not for any specific purpose, but because it felt important to document that this was real, that her abilities were real, that she was building something genuine whether or not anyone in her immediate family noticed. Renee came to dinner at our house again about 3 months after the birthday dinner. She had shifted in some small way that I could not precisely name, not softer exactly, more careful maybe, or just less certain of her own performance. She arrived on time. She complimented the table setting. She sat near her daughters and twice during the meal directed a remark specifically at one of them, asking about school, asking about a book B was reading. The questions were a little stiff, a little unpracticed, the way you speak a language you have studied but not yet learned to use naturally. But she was trying. I noticed the girls notice it too. Lily answered the questions with the cautious warmth of someone who has been let down enough times to keep her enthusiasm managed. B answered with the immediate openness she brought to almost everything, undimmed, unguarded. And I watched Renee look at her daughter in the middle of one of those answers with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Something quieter than her usual register. Something closer to actual seeing. It lasted about 30 seconds. Then the moment passed and she reached for her wine and the conversation moved on. But it had been there. 30 seconds of it. My husband drove her home that night because she had a second glass and did not feel like calling a car. When he came back, he said she had been quiet the whole drive. When he pulled up to her house, she sat in the passenger seat for a moment and then said, "I don't actually know what my daughters are like." He had not said anything in response to that, he told me. He had not known what to say. She had gotten out of the car and gone inside. I thought about that sentence for a long time. It carried a particular quality of honesty that was unusual from Renee. It was not asking for reassurance or sympathy. It was not positioning herself as a victim of circumstances or of other people's failures. It was just a plain statement of a true thing. I don't know what my daughters are like. Most parents assume they know. They carry around a picture of their child built from accumulated moments, and that picture feels like knowledge. But the picture and the actual child in motion are two different things, and the distance between them grows with every moment of inattention, until one day you realize you have a picture and a stranger. I don't know if Renee understood that consciously, but she had said the true thing out loud in in a dark car on a quiet street, and that had to mean something. The following Sunday, she appeared at my back door around noon. This was unusual. She did not typically come to my house without a specific occasion. She stood on the step and asked if she could come in. I let her in. She stood in the kitchen looking around with an expression that was hard to read. Then she asked if the girls were here. They were not. They were with their father that weekend. She nodded, was quiet for a moment. Then she said she wanted to learn how to make the soup. I did not ask which soup. I knew which soup. I took out the vegetables. I found B's step stool and set it beside the counter, and Renee stood on it, which was objectively slightly absurd because she is taller than me and did not need it. But she did not comment on the step stool, and neither did I. She washed the vegetables carefully. She peeled them with a little less skill than her 9-year-old daughter and did not seem bothered by this. She diced them slowly, concentrating, asking me twice if she was doing the cut right. We built the broth together in silence mostly, with me explaining things when explanation was needed and staying quiet when it wasn't. She tasted it when it was ready and thought about it seriously. Then she said, "They got this right on the first try?" I said yes, they did. She looked at the pot for a moment. Then she said, "I want to make this with them, not have them make it for me, with them." I told her that could be arranged. She came back the following Saturday. I called the girls over and we had one of those unplanned afternoons that end up being the ones you remember later. The 4 of us in the kitchen, Lily at the table chopping, Bee on her step stool stirring, Renee on the other side of the pot learning to slow down and wait for things to be ready. She was not natural at it. She had too much energy, kept wanting to increase the heat, had to be told twice that the flavor needed time, but she listened. At one point, Bee, without looking up from the pot, said, "It smells good now, doesn't it?" Renee looked at her daughter for a moment, then said, "It does. It really does." Bee glanced up just briefly, and that look she had, that measuring look, the one checking whether the landing was safe, that look was there. And then it eased, just slightly, just enough. Some things take a long time. Some things cannot be recovered completely. Some damage done to a child during the years when they are building the foundations of what they believe about love and safety and their own value, that damage does not simply reverse because someone decides to show up to a cooking lesson. I am not going to tell you it does. What I will tell you is that Bee still comes to my kitchen. She is 10 now, and she has genuine ability. She can taste and adjust without being told. She asks smart questions. She experiments without fear. She made a lemon tart from scratch last month and served it to my mother-in-law, who ate 2 slices and said it was better than any bakery. Bee received this with the quiet confidence of someone who already knew. Lily is 12 now. She writes things privately in notebooks she keeps on her shelf. She showed me one page once, unfolding it carefully and reading it aloud with her eyes slightly down. A short piece about what it feels like to make food for someone you love and have them not notice. She had turned it into something real and shaped, not a complaint, but an observation. The beginning of the skill of taking hard things and making something true out of them. My mother-in-law is getting older in the way that people get older when they have lived fully and are beginning to rest. She spends more afternoons in the chair by my front window than she used to. She watches the yard. She tells stories that begin with, "Do I ever tell you about?" and then describes something from 40 years ago with complete clarity. I always say, "Tell me again," because she is worth every telling. The napkin is still on my windowsill. Renee is different than she was. Not transformed, not healed exactly, but different in the specific way of someone who has looked at a true thing about themselves and decided not to look away. She still defaults sometimes to her older patterns, to the vagueness, to the skimming attention, to the way she fills space with her own weather, but the recoveries are faster now. And sometimes, unpredictably, there are these moments of actual presence, of turning toward her daughters with something real in her face. Last month she called me. This was unusual in itself. She does not call. She texted mostly. She called and said she needed to tell me something. I waited. She said, "Bee told me last week that she wants to be a chef." She said it like it was something she had decided and not like she was asking permission. I told Renee I already knew that. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "She told you before she told me." I said yes, she had. Another pause, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then Renee said, "Okay, I just wanted you to know that I know, and that I think it's right for her." She hung up before I could respond. My husband was in the next room. I went to the doorway and stood there until he looked up. He said, "What happened?" I said, "I think she's trying." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Yeah, I think so too." That is where it stands. Not a tidy ending, not a transformation, just 2 kids who cooked something real and a family slowly, imperfectly, learning what it means to pay attention. Some things take the time they take. Some things cannot be rushed without losing what makes them good. I think about that sometimes when I am in the kitchen with Bee, when she is leaning over a pot and checking the heat with the focused calm of someone who knows what she is doing. I think about a Saturday afternoon and a step stool and a soup that took 3 hours and a mother who did not ask where it came from, and then I think about the napkin, still in its fold, still on the sill. "I made this for you, Mommy. I love you." 6 words, all of it in 6 words.